So you've just turned 60 and you have $600,000 saved, and you're probably wondering if you can afford to retire soon. Well, in today's video, we'll be breaking down how an individual aged 60 can retire in the next 2 years. Over my many years in the financial services industry, my company and I have helped clients navigate the difficult questions of retirement by using the same decision-making process that I'm going to show you today. It can be hard to know if you're truly able to afford retirement. One financial misstep can feel like your world comes crashing down, particularly as you enter retirement. Well, in today's video, I'm going to show you how to avoid ending up in a situation like this. Not only will I walk you through how a 60-year-old with $600,000 in savings can retire in 2 years, but I'll also walk you through the exact thought process I used to make the decision so you can apply it to your own situation. Let's get into the video. All right, so let's hop into my financial planning software here, and we're going to start in the net worth tab, and you guys can see that she has a net worth of a little bit over $1 million. She's got about 17 grand in a bank account, about 613,000 here in these investment accounts, and that's 583 in her 401k, about 17 grand in her Roth 401k, and about $13,000 in a health savings account. We've got her property, just her primary home, and it's worth about $375,000, and she doesn't have any mortgage on this, so it's completely paid off. She's here in Indiana, and $375,000 here is actually an above average priced home, which may be shocking to you if you're on one of the coasts or something, but around here, that's not exactly a cheap home. The bottom line is having that paid off is going to be huge for her. Now, I'm going to go up here to our goals tab. Elizabeth is 60 years old right now, and we can see that her retirement age in our plan baseline is going to be 62. So she wants to work for 2 more years, and she's very adamant about getting out. She's had enough, and I'm sure many of you can probably sympathize with that. We will assume that she lives to age 90, which is a little bit above the average expected age for a female, which I think is about 86 years old right now. We're going to assume her retirement expenses are about $3,300. She's gone through, looked at her expenses over the last couple of years, and she feels really good about this number. One thing to know, that doesn't include her housing expenses like insurance and maintenance and taxes. And so this is things like eating out, entertainment, groceries, personal care like going to the salon. And it doesn't include, like I said, her housing costs or her healthcare costs either, or taxes, right? So when you add it all in, she is spending more than $3,300. So in a relatively low cost state like Indiana, $3,300 a month, excluding those other costs, is actually, pretty reasonable. You're definitely not living on the edge of poverty. We've got some healthcare costs. So once she hits Medicare, it's going to cost her about $6,092 a year. Prior to her hitting Medicare, we've actually factored in $1,000 a month for the 3 years before she hits Medicare to account for insurance premiums and just regular healthcare spending. We've got long-term care costs. We assume at the end of her life that she's going to have to spend 68 grand for the final 2 years for long-term care costs. And that's also going to go up with inflation. We've got a couple new cars here, one in 2027, one in 2039. So that's about it as far as big expenses. We'll look at the investments. And so Elizabeth is pretty conservative. Right now, she's about 50% stock and 50% bonds. And so the baseline return we're assuming is going to be about 6.5% per year, which is kind of middle of the road, and that sort of matches up with the long-term historical averages of, a 50% stock, 50% bond portfolio. So now we've gone through the major assumptions. Let's get into our retirement analysis. And the first thing that's going to jump out to you is that we've got a 42% probability of success. Not good. Should Elizabeth start playing the Powerball? Is that the only way she's going to be able to retire? I don't think so. I think there's a lot of levers that we can pull, and I'm going to show you what those are. But yeah, off the bat, not good. Let me tell you a little something about these numbers so you kind of have an idea of where they're coming from. So the software runs something called a Monte Carlo simulation, and essentially what they do is they take the returns and then they take the statistical relationship of your returns and how much they vary from year to year, sort of based on how aggressive your portfolio is, and then they simulate the results 1,000 times. And so we can kind of think about this in the way that they talk about the metaverse in all of these sci-fi and Marvel movies and everything, and where we have all these different universes with different outcomes. In some of those, you hit this winning streak of major returns where you were compounding well above average, and you end up with an ending net worth of several $1,000,000. Some of these universes, you're very unlucky and you crash and burn, and you might run out of funds at age 67, for example. What they do is they take the median value of all of those 1,000 trial runs, and then from that they kind of calculate statistically what's the probability of your being successful in actually getting through to age 90. So what they're saying is, in 420 trials out of 1,000, you were successful, and unfortunately, the other 580, you were unsuccessful in having your money last through age 90. But like I told you, let's not freak out yet. First of all, there's a lot of levers to pull, and second of all, there are a lot of criticisms that we could throw at Monte Carlo, and I don't want to overemphasize it. The big weakness here is that, look, your life is not a Monte Carlo simulation. You cannot replay retirement 1,000 times until you've hit this average number, which is why I don't really take it too seriously. But I do think there is some value in it, and the value is here. What we're going to do right now, we're going to play with the different variables, and we're going to change the variables, and we're going to see what moves the dial. If I can take that 42 and increase it by 10 percentage points by, let's say, working longer or something like that, that tells us something. So that's where the real value in Monte Carlo comes from, by changing the variables, seeing which ones really move the dial, and then that's going to inform our strategy. But I don't want to get overly focused on a number. Obviously, higher is going to be better. Arbitrarily, I like to shoot for a minimum of a 75% probability. So we're going to see if we can get there. But, that's not mandated from the heavens. So I don't want you to freak out or be too overly focused on that number. All right, so let's start changing some of these variables. Now, the first thing I'm going to show you guys is what happens if she works longer. We've got this Elizabeth's retirement and it's at age 62. What if she works until age 65? And there we go. Problem solved. All she has to do is work 3 more years, and that's it. Job done. No, I kid. That's great, right? That's very useful information. The problem is that for Elizabeth, she is adamant that she wants to do everything she can to not work any longer than the next 2 years. The other problem is a lot of people won't have that choice. You may become disabled, you may become laid off, and you're simply going to have to retire at an earlier age than you wanted to. And so we're not actually going to use that, but it is useful information. And if you're a DIY investor at home, that should tell you a lot. Like, hey, as much as I hate it, maybe I should just work longer. But in Elizabeth's case, we're going to do everything we can to make sure she doesn't have to work longer. So I'm going to bring that back down to 62, and let's see what else really moves the dial for her. Retirement monthly expenses. This one I'm not going to touch. The reason is $3,300 isn't really that high of spending already, and what you're going to find is it's going to be really hard to cut down on a lot of your expenses. You could do little things with the cars here, and let's say $20,000 instead of $25,000. See what the impact is. So that bumped it up a little. I mean, that wasn't huge. I guess if I went and did this with the other one, Yeah, I mean, we squeeze an extra 2%. That's not the main driver there, but that tells us something, right? We could at a point either maybe she buys used cars or maybe she just waits a few more years. So let's start to get in with what I think are going to be the bigger drivers. And the first one, I'm going to hop over here to Social Security. You hear it all the time. People are always like, well, you need to wait until age 70 if you can to take Social Security. And the reason is every year you wait past your normal retirement age, which is about 67 for most people, you get an 8% bump in your Social Security, which adds up. I mean, think about that. That would be 24% higher if you wait those extra 3 years. Now, we have Elizabeth taking it at 62, and in her case, what that means is that her Social Security is going to be about 30% lower than it would be if she waited just until age 67, her normal retirement age. So let's see what would happen if we went to her full retirement age. Wow, that's a huge difference. All of a sudden, we went from 42 to 57. So we can see this needs to be a big area of focus for us in our discussions about how she's going to make this work. Now, what would happen if she did wait until age 70, the longest you can wait? Goes up to 65, even better. If she can, it probably makes sense to wait until age 70. Now, it's not always going to be best for everybody. If you've had major health issues, if you've already had serious heart attacks or cancer or something like that, you probably don't want to wait that long. Also, it's going to depend on how much money you have and in which types of accounts. So if you have millions in a 401k or millions in a taxable brokerage, and then what are the assumptions we're using for our returns? Because you have to remember, if you wait to take Social Security, and so you need to draw from your portfolio to live to supplement the income you would have from Social Security, you're taking from productive assets that were earning a rate of return, and now that's an opportunity cost. And so taking Social Security later is not always the best for you. You need to evaluate this on a case-by-case basis. But in Elizabeth's situation, it's almost certainly better for her to wait. Let me jump down here to the savings. She's got these 3 account types. You've got the 401k, taxable brokerage, which has nothing in it right now, or there's her Roth 401k. She's got 2 years remaining here where she could sock back a lot of money in these accounts. She makes about $100,000 a year, and after taxes and all of her expenses, that leaves her with about $27,000 roughly to save. And so what we're going to look at is say, okay, what if she saved $25,000 each of the next 2 years? Where's she going to get the biggest bang for her buck in which type of account? And just so you guys know, for a 401k or a Roth 401k, right now, if you're under 50, the contribution limits are $22,500 a year. That's in 2024. And there's a catch-up of another $7,500, so you could put a total of $30,000 in. And so she's over age 50, which means she could do the catch-up. And so she could put 30 total if she wanted to, but we're just going to look at 25 since that's kind of matching her cash flow. So we'll start with the 401k, see what happens. 25,000 in. There you go. Another huge jump. Suddenly she's at 76%. $267,000 remaining after it's all said and done. Let's look at what happens if we put it into a taxable account. 78K, and it went up even more. So perhaps surprisingly, she got better bang for her buck putting it in a taxable account instead of a 401k. And I want to tell you, this is a mistake a lot of people make at the end of retirement. In many cases, you're overfunding your 401k, and you should be funding things like a taxable brokerage, like a Roth, like a health savings account, instead of continuing to sock more away in your 401k. And that's the case for Elizabeth. Because at the end of your career, you don't get as much bang for your buck out of allowing your money to compound tax deferred because you're getting ready to retire and you might be drawing down from that account. We see that's the case here for Elizabeth. It's actually suboptimal for her to put more money into her 401k. Now let's go to the Roth. Everybody's always pounding the table about these, and let's see if in fact this is her best bet. And it actually went down a little bit. We're at 77% probability of success. And so we see the probability of success actually went down a little bit. The median ending value is actually a little bit higher. That has to do with those trial runs. What happened here, I think, is that I have it set for you're going to drain your taxable accounts first, then you're going to go tax deferred, and then you're going to go to your Roth. And probably what happened is that in a couple more trials, she ran out of money because she was tapping her Roth last. It doesn't really make much of a difference here. The numbers are nearly identical. And so what we can tell right off the bat is that don't put in the 401k, and we're going to have to decide on, do we want the Roth or the taxable account? And there are other considerations you have to make. I mean, a Roth is encumbered. You have rules around taking withdrawals, and if it's less than 5 years old, you're going to pay a penalty on earnings. For Elizabeth, it's not really going to be a concern because I'm not worried about her having to tap it in the first 5 years. I'm going to leave it there for now just because it does give her a bit more of a bang for a buck on that median ending wealth. And I'm also going to show you that things change a little bit when you change the assumption of your investment return, and that's probably going to shift it in favor of having it in a Roth versus a taxable. We just know we shouldn't be funding more into the 401k. We need to focus on one of these two accounts, and maybe we even split it up. Now, the last variable we're going to play with is what happens if we make her investments either more conservative or more aggressive. You know, it's interesting because she's really on edge right now, and she's worried about everything that's going on politically and in the financial markets. And so she actually wants to go more conservative than a 50% stock portfolio. So let's see what happens when we change the assumptions. Her current is this balance, 50-50. Let's go down to, let's say, a preservation. I think that's a 30% stock portfolio. And wow, we gave up a huge portion of our gains as far as the probability of success. Probably not smart. And this is a mistake a lot of people make. They go into retirement and they're too conservative, and their funds aren't going to last if they're mostly in bonds and cash, especially when you're in a situation where interest rates are just still historically low. So let's go back and let's see, what if we changed it? Instead of being at this 50-50, let's go to this moderate, and that's a 60% stock portfolio. Wow. Okay, now we're back at 80. That raised it another 3%. And that raised our ending net value by about 100 grand. So that's, I think, a meaningful difference, and that tells us a lot. What if we go to growth? Now we're at 81% probability of success. So we've jumped a little bit. You don't really get that much bang for your buck. We'll go to aggressive. Actually drops down. Net worth at the end increased, but the probability of success dropped. I'm going to talk about that here in a minute, why that's the case. We're going to go to most aggressive, though, and see what happens here. And the probability of success drops even more. So probably a surprising finding, right? Now, I'm looking at the assumptions, and we started at 6.5%. The 60% stock portfolio is 7.1%. If you go to 90, that's an expected return of 8.5%. So why would your probability of success drop if you're getting higher returns? Well, it goes back into that Monte Carlo. You get into that metaverse of returns, and when you increase how much stock you own, that increases the variability of these outcomes. And what happened is that there were many more universes in which you just crashed and burned and you ran out of funds early. And there's something that's really important. It's called sequence risk. And retirees often overlook this at their peril. And it's easy to do, especially if you've looked at the last 10 or 15 years of returns and you're like, well, stock markets only go up. But people often forget that there have been really, really brutal long-term bear markets in history. And if you hit one of these streaks right at the beginning of your retirement, you may not ever recover. And so we're going to look at how that situation actually might unfold. All right, so I want to show you this scenario analysis to kind of look at sequence risk so you can kind of see how this plays out. So this isn't actually the Monte Carlo of returns. Right now, what it's looking at is my baseline scenario. I'm a 50-50 investor, and I'm averaging 6.5% straight line every year. So I've got my expenses, I've got my withdrawals, I take them out. On those funds, I earn 6.5%. Every year, rinse and repeat. There's no variability. And in that situation, that's the blue line here. You basically have zero assets at the end. If I took that same exact situation, but I'm a 60% investor and I make all those other changes. So we got the 50 grand in savings going into the Roth. Now, I would have 547,000 out at the end, age 90. I'm in a way better situation. But again, it's 7.1% every year, minus expenses and withdrawals, and I keep just steadily going up. Now, the real world, of course, doesn't work like that. And so what I've got in here is some situations that we can look at, and I'm going to flip over here to this bad decade to start, and it's going to completely change this. All I've done is input the returns from the last 25 years of the stock and bond market. So what now we're assuming is all of a sudden this year we get into the same situation investors were in when the tech bubble burst. And what happened was you had 3 years in a row of negative returns. That's a completely realistic situation, and that completely changed our outcome. Now, I'm going to show you the baseline investor, the 50% stock, 50% bond investor. He pretty much gets to age 80, maybe 81 before he runs out of money. So even though he's more conservative, he actually ran out first. So we can see the impact of being too conservative. Now, on the other hand, our 60% stock investor did make it a couple more years. But in any event, neither one of them lasted through to age 90. And that's the sequence risk, right? You can totally blow yourself up by being too aggressive. What would happen if I changed to this most aggressive investor? Just to show you guys, even worse. So we've still got our baseline guy, again, he makes it till about age 81 because he's 50-50. The 90% stock investor makes it to age 69 only because he experienced a 47% loss over that time and just simply couldn't recover when you're taking from your portfolio. I cannot overemphasize how important it is to get it right. And you've really got to find this Goldilocks situation. And so there are 3 things that you need to focus on when you run this analysis. Number 1, you're going to do that stress test that we did in the beginning. You're going to find that point where you stop getting a lot of bang for your buck from being more aggressive. Number 2, you need to have a strict risk management plan in place. And by the way, no, this isn't market timing. It's insane to me. You see all these advisors out there, and the only thing that they want you to do is have a diversified portfolio to manage risk. But we see that fails time and time again. Professional money managers, hedge fund managers, prop traders at banks, they all have an enormous emphasis on managing risk. And these people are not stupid. There's a huge difference between thinking that you're going to be able to time the market where you can sell at the top and buy at the bottom. That's stupid. Nobody does that consistently. Not even professional money managers do that. And so I agree with advisors about avoiding that type of market timing. But if we're talking about managing risk and increasing or reducing exposures to certain risk assets, it makes a ton of sense. Everybody should be doing this. There's actually a lot of academic, peer-reviewed research on methods that are successful for this, and you should do your research. We use these methods, we adopt them for our clients, and you could do the same thing for yourself too. It's just going to take a little effort. So that's point number 2. Number 3, use something like a bucket strategy. You bucket your assets into kind of different time horizons for when you'll want to tap your money. And so a lot of advisors kind of have 3 buckets. One's for immediate needs, one's for intermediate term, and one's for longer term needs. We do something similar, but we bucket it a little bit differently. One, maybe that 40% that I talked about that would normally go into bonds. We invest in really stable assets that are usually kicking off income because One, we want the income coming in to you to kind of meet your monthly expenses. And then two, if we get into a big bear market, we want to have about 3 years worth of assets that we can tap and draw down. They're going to be stable. And then we can kind of leave a lot of that 60% bucket for growth where we don't have to worry about tapping that for your living expenses. And we can pretty much get through a severe bear market and let that have time to recover. And so you should be doing something like that as well. And I think these are the primary ways that you can avoid that sequence risk. But it's going to require some thought and effort on your part. All right, so there you go. We've gotten her to 80% probability of success. I think she has a really good shot of doing this. We just need to make sure that she doesn't take Social Security at age 62, that we're very strategic about where she wants to save her funds for the next couple of years. And number 3, we've got to nail the investment allocation, right? We've got to find that Goldilocks scenario for her portfolio where she doesn't blow up in a major crisis, but we can't be too conservative either, or she's never going to make it. There's a host of other factors that you've got to consider, and everybody's situation is going to be different. What works for her probably isn't going to work for you because you might have your money somewhere else. You may have less, may have more, you may have higher expenses. One thing we didn't talk about here was Roth conversions, and it's because I looked at it before, and for her, Roth conversions actually didn't move the needle, which might surprise you considering how often you hear that you have to be doing Roth conversions. In her situation, she's not going to have these massive required minimum distributions to take when she's in her 70s because she's going to be drawing down before. So it actually would have hurt her to do Roth conversions. But that might not be the case for you, since everyone's situation is going to be unique. So there you have it. If you're retiring soon and you want a closer look at your situation and the factors that will determine your success, click the link in the description to my website where you can book a complimentary consultation with me and we can figure out what might work best for you. Thanks for watching.